Good evening, and welcome to the F.W. Olin Library. I'm William Garvin. I'm the director. And before we get started, I was about to say there are three people. There's an entity and then two people I'd like to recognize. And the entity, a good friend of the institution, is the Sunderland Foundation, which a couple of years ago provided us with a grant of a little over $2 million to refurbish not just this area, but the entire second floor of the library, and also put a new physical plant, HVAC plant in here, which was very much needed. So we're grateful. They've been a friend. The Sunderland Foundation has been a friend of this institution for at least 3/4 of the century, and we're grateful for that friendship. The other person I'd like to recognize is a woman named Maria Elizabeth Hinckley. And she was librarian here for many years. She was librarian when Walker Library was constructed. Many people don't know Walker Library now, but as Aaron Jones can tell you, the board giveth and the board taketh away. No, it was renamed Bay Hall. In her estate, she left a very generous gift to us for the library, which allows the library to put on events like this, and also to have a reception to give us good food and drink. And so we're grateful for the work she did here, and want to remember her. Finally, I've got a book here, and this is out of the rare book room. It's falling to pieces. And it is Jonathan Edwards' The Great Christian Doctrine of Original Sin. Now, I'm not going to preach to you about that. It's a Boston imprint from 1758. And the significance of this book and the connection is that the first president of this institution, for whom this lecture series is named, was Nathan Jackson Morrison. And Morrison was a complicated figure. I'll put it that way. He was, that's a kind way of saying he was, at times, I think, a difficult person. But I think without the work that he did, I don't know that this institution would have survived its early days. But one of the things Morrison had to do was go to, and he hated doing this work, he had to go to Boston and New York to raise money to keep this fledgling institution going. And he found it humiliating work. There are stories about him pacing back and forth in front of a donor's mansion or townhouse, trying to screw up his courage to go in there and beg for money. But what he also did on these trips, and this is the reason I have this book, is this book has a book plate in it dated 1860, and it's for the Boston Public Library. So what he would do when he was on these fundraising trips, particularly in Boston, is he would go and beg for books, because he was a very staunch advocate for the creation of a library. And the library was housed in various buildings on campus. And many of those books, and we have a fair number still downstairs in the rare book collection, that bear the imprints of these institutions that no longer wanted the book because of condition. In this case, it was actually a duplicate. It's written duplicate. And he would bring back not only money that he had raised, but he would also bring back books to build a library. So this lecture series is named in his honor, and I think he's a person, and Aaron and I have talked about this, a person that isn't always recognized as he should be. This is the 9th annual Morrison Lecture, and our speaker tonight, before I give the technicals on her, the bio material. We met in Florence this summer, and yeah, it was too bad. It was tough duty, And by the way, thank you to my friends from MSU who are with us tonight too. But when I heard her, and I heard her give a lecture, and one of the things that really struck me about her was the interdisciplinarity of her work, how she had reached out to colleagues in libraries and archives, but also in history, and brought her knowledge of biology and botany and sort of traded it with these people who were historians and archivists to do some really fascinating research, which we'll talk about this evening. So, Kyra Krakos, sorry, I knew I'd mess that up. Dr. Kyra Krakos is a professor of biology and program director for the sustainability program at Maryville University. She is also a research associate at the Missouri Botanical Garden and a St. Louis Biodiversity Fellow in the Living Earth Collaborative. Kyra did her PhD at Washington University and was named Science Educator of the Year by the St. Louis Academy of Science in 2016. Her lab focuses on the need to understand the dynamics of the natural world in a changing environment. And you can find her TEDx talk from 2015, which is titled Plants, People, and Pollinators, a Love Story. I recommend that. It's a good story about being encouraged by a parent to do research too. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kyra Krakos to Drury.
Good? All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was such a kind intro. It was really a lovely place to get to be friends. I recommend to meet your friends in Florence. It was not a bad summer. Anyway, I'm worried I've got the waterfall. Is that okay? We just hang on. I know he's filming, so I want to make sure it doesn't fall down. There you go. Tucked? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be here and talk to you about this. It's a historical ethnobotanical study that focuses on the Medici family in Florence and how their last ruler used plants as a political tool, which is really fun. You'll notice from my bio, though, that I'm a botanist and I do pollination research. These are my three main areas that I do research in, and none of them have to do with historical ethnobotany. So what you're actually seeing tonight is a side quest. There are really fun, interesting things out there in the world, and when you meet people that want to collaborate, pay attention, hop on there. I know there's some students here tonight. I'm going to tell you this little piece of advice, which is, I'll say get on the boat, and in about 4 minutes that'll make sense to you, okay? About the most interesting things happen, I think, in research when you take a side quest, absolutely. But I did want to give a little shout out because this series is sponsored by libraries, and this research is very much possible because of good archives. So I wanted to show you the library that was very important to me growing up. This is the library in San Jose, California, where I grew up, where I hid out for a good decade and a half as a kid. This is what it looked like. This is what it looks like now. But it was my haven. It was where books, as my first teachers, were really helped show me who I was. And I still remain a big book junkie. I've actually read War and Peace. I've made it through all of Song of Ice and Fire long before the movies came out. My dog's name is Asimov. So for the nerds out there, I'm a big sci-fi nerd. Let's go toe-to-toe on that. I bet I can take you on anything. I've got a lot of opinions. I'm a classics nerd. But libraries were really, really important to me growing up and continue to do so. So it's a real honor and privilege to be in this gorgeous space tonight where still books and libraries are getting the proper funding that they need. So with that, let's go to the Renaissance, shall we? Which is where this story takes place. So I will give you a lot of history tonight that I only know because of my collaborators. I am wandering way outside my lane as we get to the botany part of this. But our story begins and centers on this folio that looks rather remarkable. In 2012, Dr. Ashley Buchanan uncovered this folio, which had been misfiled for over 200 years. There are historians and archivists who twitch when they hear something like that. And it's the previously unknown recipes of the last Medici princess, Maria Luisa. They were known about, they were referenced in the documents, but no one had the recipes, the folios. And Ashley was a grad student at the time, and she was working in the archive and flipped over the folio and went, oh my goodness, these are the lost recipes of the last princess. And from that came all of her research and so forth. So that became the primary source of the translations that she and I began to study as then I looked into the plants in these recipes, which is really super exciting. So like I said, this is a story of two libraries. One is the Medici archives. Bless their hearts, they never threw anything away. They were massive record keepers. And it's a collaboration between the two of us. The archive, which originally was in the Uffizi on the Arno River, and then there was a big flood in the 60s, and it got a new home, which is properly maintaining all of these records. It has over 4 million letters, 6,429 volumes, occupies over a mile of shelf space. I went down into them once. There was no need for me to do that afterwards, but it was pretty cool to see. It covers the chronological span of about 200 years, from about 1540 to 1740. And it documents the political, the diplomatic, the gastronomic, the economic, the artistic, the scientific, the military, and medical culture of Tuscany at this time. The Medici's power came a lot from the information that they carried at all times. And that really helps us out. The other important archive is the Peter H. Raven Library Rare Books Collection, which is at the Missouri Botanical Garden and is one of the finest botanical libraries in the world and sits at the top of their herbarium, which is where my offices were. It contains over 6,500 volumes, and I mean, some of the oldest books are like 13th and 14th century. If you remember in Harry Potter, the screaming plant that they pull up out of the plant, which was memorable, okay? That is based on a woodcut from one of the books in this library that you can still go and see there. That has become very popular since Harry Potter came out. It's that drawing essentially, but it is what in the 13th century they thought would make a good aphrodisiac because the roots looked like a little man. And that woodcut is directly what became in Harry Potter. It predates Linnaeus. We have first Linnaean copies in there. It looks like Dumbledore Library up there. It's really just remarkable. But this becomes really important because if you're trying to figure out what they call plants by their common name and then what plant they're referring to from like the 1600s, you need a botanical library that crosses over all that time period. So it was very serendipitous when my collaborator, Dr. Ashley Buchanan, and I met. It was the first time I'd been to Italy. I was a fairly young new professor doing a study abroad for the first time. She was finishing up her graduate work, and both of us were teaching in the program at the time. And we were on the island of Capri, and we'd sent the students off to do something, and she said, oh, do you want to get on a boat with me and like hang out for a while? I'm like, I do, I really do. Yeah, this is what I mean, get on the boat with, And I said, I want to hear about your project, about this folio and talk to me about it. And you should know that great science collaborations almost always start on like a boat or in a bar, hands down, on like a cocktail napkin, right? This is where good science happens. And so we were talking about this project she was doing, and she said to me, she said, well, there's one of the recipes, and it uses something called an Ignatius bean. What is that? And I go, I don't know. It's like a common name from the 16th century. I have no idea. I said, but I know how to find out. The library is above me, above my labs. And so we collaborated on that, and that's when I learned that history is much, much harder than science. Oh my goodness, you can't Google, like, it was horrible. I mean, just going through page by page, trying to figure out, first of all, what the plant was, and what it meant, where it came from, and it was, it's where I realized that also cross-discipline work, high recommend, very humbling, very humbling. See, here we are on the boat. This is where, I didn't know anything about trade routes from the 1700s, things that a historian, in 101 would know. And she didn't know that pollen housed sperm. So, we both had a lot to learn from each other. And that was wonderful. It kept us, super engaged. And I was, back learning things like, I hadn't had a history class since I was, an undergraduate, right? And so cross-discipline really keeps you both humble and engaged in new spaces. And so into this, so we finished that first recipe, and it was a very cool story. I'm like, oh, this is cool. And I go, this is awesome. How many more of these do you have? And she looked at me, she said, 200. And I went, we got out our cocktail napkins, and we mapped out 5 years of research. But then she had to finish her degree, and I had to get tenure, and we do all the things. And it's a side project, right? So we've been working on this since that point. Multiple recipes, published many things, all the rest of it. Our goal is at some point here to take a joint sabbatical and write the book that should go with it. But what a fun thing. And when the dust settled, we had this whole plan laid out. And the part that was always continually fun is you really never know what on earth the story will be when you start one of these new recipes. And we can kind of slow walk this because there's a Google Drive that 2 people on the planet have access to, which is this folio of work. And it's her and it's me. And so as we're doing our careers and our actual jobs and all the rest of it, we continue to work on this on the side. And so tonight, I'm going to talk to you about the most exciting or the most frequent recipe that was known, but also how on earth the Medici became plant powerhouses in this respect, and what Anna Maria did. So we have to do a little bit of history here, and these are all the things I learned as I collaborated with historians. The Medici were an Italian banking family, a political dynasty from the 14th to the 16th century, the 18th century. They gave us 4 popes, 2 queens of France. They ruled as the Dukes of Florence and the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. And most famously, that banking system became the foundation of what we have today. They sort of funded a good portion of the Renaissance and European power structures for centuries, a lot of wars. They did some killing. The Medici were not the people you want to cross. I have a soft spot for them forever because they kept the Inquisition out of Florence, which is why we still have the works of Michelangelo. So they get a pass, in my opinion. But let me talk to you about, now this is a trimmed family tree, all right? So we need to know a little about where they are. So I'm going to take you on a quick crash course of the highlights of the family. Because it's important to understand the context of the family that Princess Anna came from. She is a product of her family culture. And they certainly did more than just fund the Renaissance. The founder was Cosimo de' Medici, the Pater Patriae, the father of his country as he was known. One of the things I love, so this is his official portrait outside the Uffizi and what you see if you look at the history books. I love the last, well, pretty much since COVID or whatever, Netflix started to do a series called The Masters of Florence. Anybody here watch it or know of it? Well, it gave these guys a bit of a glow up. And so I'm going to kind of throw those in here because this is what we all hope history decides we look like. Game of Thrones fans, this is Rob Stark also, okay, yeah. Where you're like, I mean, my goodness, could they cast me this way in 100 years, Yeah. I'm like, that is quite the glow up. But he was the founder of the dynasty. He himself didn't rule Florence, except that he was funding everything, so he was the power. And he was very interested in creating a dynasty that would rule Tuscany and expand his power across Europe. And boy, he meant it, and his family, followed into that. His son was a bit of a dud, Pietro the Gouty, okay? I think that says it all. But his grandson was Lorenzo the Magnificent, Lorenzo II. And he's the most famous of the Medici because he's the one that assumed control over this area and really became known as the palace. He's the one who funded Michelangelo and so forth. He gets a glow up from one series and then another series. He just keeps getting better, right? I mean, no, yes, and yes, please. So, you know, that's pretty fun as you go across. So let's learn a little about Lorenzo. He really turned this power source into a trade empire, building these power networks across not just Europe, but into the Middle East. And he started to have a real scientific presence. So for instance here, in 1473 AD, you have records of him getting a diplomatic gift from the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt. And it documents the spices, the aromatics, and the medicinal plants and herbs that were given to him that were collected across Asia that he brought back to and looked at. So he really was expanding the kind of thing that they did. He also is where you start to have the Uffizi. Now, you go to the Uffizi today and you see all the art, okay? But Uffizi means office. And it was originally their offices. And like I said, they saved everything. Information was power. So if you had a letter that was sent to them, they would make a copy of it in a record for their archives. They'd also make a copy of their response back. And so over time, you'd have like a full record of, they kept the receipts of everything. And historians can go in there and look at like, well, what was economically happening in the city? What was being traded? What was being sold? What was being brought into the city and out? Remarkably, and not just you know, the art that they were funding. The original Uffizi had a collection of what were called natural wonders, sort of like a natural history museum. They had a pharmaceutical laboratory in one of the wings, and on the rooftop was a botanical garden. So they really are truly Renaissance individuals. Now, in the Medici archives, which is the other archive that we work with, I want to show you an example of a direct translation of not her recipes, but of the archives, okay? So you would be able to see who the recipient was, okay? This is all translated. The date that it arrived, the actual document, and anytime I show you something that's an original document, I'll put the little logo of the archive down in the corner. So looking at this one on chocolate, do you know I need my glasses? Now I need my glasses. This is the very brutal part of getting old. Yeah. Here we go. Father Ettore thanks Cardinal de' Medici for a box of assorted chocolates, mentioning his favorite varieties as a citron-flavored one and one based on a Spanish recipe. He also states that his doctors have endorsed chocolate as a treatment for his flatulence. June 13th, 1671, we know a lot about what's going on. All right. So next up is Cosimo I. Again, I'm running through a very trimmed tree here. Cosimo I was the first royal duke. Now they have purchased themselves into being royalty. And he marries the right lady for that and sort of expands his power, and they start to marry into the royal houses of Europe. The part I want to focus on is he was known for his curiosity in the field of alchemy. He opened the first foundry or science workshops in the Palazzo Vecchio, which was one of many of their palaces, but was attached to the Uffizi. If you go, you can explore that today. Side note and recommendation, if you go to the Palazzo Vecchio and the Uffizi, do the secret passages tour. It's so much cooler than just the regular one because they were the ruling class and they had to have a lot of ways to escape should the grubby people get into make a fuss. And so you see their secret passages where they could escape if necessary. Dark times. If your life is one where you need a passageway away from the common folk, rethink what you're doing with your life. But he had this laboratory and in his home. And for almost 200 years, that laboratory was one of the many places in pharmacies, that are pharmacias, where the Medici explored and made a record and produced medicines. And he was one of those. He was an interesting cat, though. Now, he has a little bit I have a soft spot for him because he employed a botanist full-time at his court, Giuseppe Casabona, a botanical consultant who spent specimens of rare plants from Florence and traveled the world bringing back plants for them to study in their pharmacias. Basically, he employed a botanist, like as a record for the first time. So I like that. I like that we get, we get some airtime there. But there's some things that are very interesting you learn about Cosimo from, again, now we're looking at an archive here. This is January 11th, 1547. He sent Ferrante Gonzaga 2 vials from an untested batch of the famous anti-poison oil produced in the Medici pharmacy, recommended that Gonzaga first test it out on a prisoner with a death sentence. Now, you can be a little horrified. You're like, okay, that's 1547. Let me tell you what I see here. I see scientific thought. You go back even 50 years, and what he's going to say is, say a prayer, light a candle, and take the medicine. Instead, he's saying, test it out first. Make sure it's okay. Make sure it's safe. I know it's horrifying, but consider that this is a little bit like when you get, meds, and it says take with food, or don't operate heavy machinery. This is just good manners. This is just the instructions on the pill bottle at the time. So you have to sort of embrace, it's kind of dark. But it's showing cause and effect, not just alchemy, which is, very interesting. And, yes, also the way that they viewed what you could do with a prisoner. Now, Cosimo has a little bit of a scandal in his background. And the archives actually solved this, and it didn't work out well for him. It worked out just great because they didn't solve it until currently. But there was a smoking gun in the archives. There was a series of documents that challenged his involvement in the plot to assassinate Piero Strozzi. Now, the Strozzis and the Medici just fought constantly. And there's some really dark history there of slaughtering each other's heirs and sons and whatnot. But Piero Strozzi, he was accused of being part of a plot to assassinate him. And the timing becomes really important because it was suggested that he would be assassinated by poison. Now, the Borgia, perhaps you've heard of that family, their chosen weapon was a stiletto, okay? For the Medici, it's poison, right? So they're quite known for that. Look at this document. So they dragged Cosimo into court and said, you've been part of this plot to assassinate Strozzi, and he vowed up and down on his children's lives and 14 Bibles, I was never part of it, there's no way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, all the way in the early 2000s, they found this document in his private writings. February 1548 is the date of the letter. The assassination attempt was April 1548. And the assassination attempt is exactly this. Apropos of nothing, sent to Cosimo, Strozzi usually stops to drink a few times during his journey. It explains that all that was needed was an excellent toxin that could simply be put in his drinking flask, and then the location of where he stopped with his horses. 2 months later, that's exactly what happened to Strozzi. And this was in Cosimo's writings. I don't know. It's a titch of a smoking gun. The thing is, the smoking gun didn't show up for, until the 2000s, so good for Cosimo. He got away with it. It's alleged, right? It's pretty on. But here's the thing about Cosimo. He was very into science. And actually, in the Plaza Vecchio, you can see the portrait of his son and heir. Their formal court portrait is his son working in the foundry with one of the scientists. What a message that that's what he chose to portray his son and heir as working with one of the masters. Really means it's very central to what they do. All right, Cosimo III. This is Anna Maria's daddy. He gets no glow up, and it's rough. Here's what's rough. He's a Habsburg, and it shows. The Habsburgs did a bit of inbreeding aggressively. I have genetic questions that we use in my evolution class about that. They calculate the genetic index of how inbred various Habsburg were, and it's always like, it's not okay. It's not okay at all. But so keep in mind, this is his court portrait. That's like as big a like Instagram filter as you could get. And this is as good as it could get. Anyway, poor guy. The Habsburg features just never really can be fixed and still be recognizable. But he was very interesting. He was very into building botanical knowledge in particular. He, between 1682 and 84, sent numerous cases, bottles, drums of medicinal syrups and tinctures all over the Portuguese court in particular. Specific things that were asked to like save the queens of France. In return, he was able to have his merchant ships collect along all of the Portuguese shipping routes. That becomes important because his daughter Anna Maria will use those same shipping routes. He built botanical gardens. He was kind of weird and ahead of his time in a lot of ways. He was he really was a strict vegan, adhering to a plant-based diet. And he had a very keen interest in botany, very much developed the medicines and pharmacies within Florence and extensively around. He really dug pineapples because they'd been, they appeared to be like particular interest to him. And that's actually why the first greenhouses were built in Florence, because he always had these boxes of fresh pineapples being shipped to him. And he decided he wanted to have them more access, so that's why he invented these big greenhouses that are still in Florence today, because the man wanted fresh pineapple, and they owned everything. Some of the gardens that you can see here, and he's actively taking part in this scientific research, developing new medicine. This is one of the gardens here, the Orto Botanica and Firenze. There's the design of it. There's the actual garden. That one in particular, I took that photo. It's in front of the area where there's all these poisonous plants. Remember, the Medici didn't just share medicines. They also dealt in poisons. Now, I walked students through here, and I was like, no, don't touch that. Definitely don't touch that one. Do not even go near that plant. There's just things all over. Everyone locks up dangerous things, but not plants. It just baffles me as a botanist. I'm always just amazed at the utterly lethal things just hanging out on roadsides. But they didn't call it a poison garden. You'll hear about these days. It's a marketing thing. They'll say, oh, here's the poison garden, like in Cambridge or something. That's not what they called it. They called it a political garden. These were called political plants in their records. And one of the things that they had was, this is so dark, you could purchase in their pharmacies an inheritance powder. If grandpa's taken too long to kick off and give you this stuff. Whew, yeah. Here is that image, I did have it, that's great, of Francesco and Medici, the son of Cosimo. I'm gonna walk over here for a minute. This is him, right here. That's the son and heir of the Medici Empire. And his formal portrait that his dad chose to hang was him working under a Renaissance master. Such a message about the importance of science. Okay, so the fonderias and pharmacies are still in operation to this day. Their interest in medicine and the natural world continues to be something that operates. So, for instance, you can go to this pharmacy. I took that photo on the bottom. You can purchase some of the things that they sell. Not inheritance powders. That's not on the table. But, for instance, you can purchase Catherine de' Medici's perfume that she wore on her wedding day when she was sent to France. And I purchased it for the cost of a small child, but it smells a lot like oranges. So this one's attached to the Palazzo Pitti. So if you were a wealthy, powerful person in Europe, you might get something like this as a diplomatic gift from the Medici. And this is in one of the archives in Rome. I think it's actually in a museum currently. It's a portable pharmacy, and it would have the little medicines, and it would have instructions, and it would have the ducal stamp, so you're getting the good stuff, and you would get things that could help you survive, in particular your children survive, as a gift from the Medici. So it is into this family business that Anna Maria is born. Anna Maria Luisa. And then her brother, who we have here next to her, Johnstone, he's like a whole thing. He was very unwell. He was severely addicted to anything he could get his hands on. And he was a recluse, and eventually the reason that she ruled for two decades Florence was because he just wasn't capable of it. He was hiding out in the palace and living a bit like Caligula, actually. And like I said, that's best glossed over at this point. But with the death of her father, and then both of her brothers, and no heirs, she had no children, neither did her brother, Anna Maria became the last Medici, ruling as a single female for over 20 years. Realized that this was soft power. She was female, and this is not a great time for women being in power. So what's very interesting is everything you see about what she does, she shuts down the poison aspect, inheritance, powder sales, etc. That is not something that happens under her. She deals exclusively with this reputation for very powerful medicine, because she is very aware that if a woman was to be accused of using inheritance, she wasn't going to get away with anything like her male ancestors had. She had to be very cautious about what her reputation was. What's interesting, so she continued to create those portable medicinal pharmacies, using them throughout the royal networks of Europe as gifts, and they became the source of her political power. Now, what she's known for, actually, is something called the patrimony, or the family pact. What this says is, it was a legal document that has been upheld in court today that said that all of the things the Medici owned, and she cataloged all of it down to the spoons, okay? All of the art, everything, all the treasures collected over these 3 centuries, could not leave Florence. And it belonged to the citizens of Florence. That was her last legal act. And that held to this day, which is why Florence is what it is. Otherwise, everything would have been sold off or taken, or this kind of thing, for money for whoever was running the, etc. But instead, Florence has all the art. It's where students go by the thousands to study and see the David and the Michelangelos and all the other Ninja Turtles, and to work in there. And makes Florence this thriving city, whereas it would have just been sort of another small town probably in trouble. And so she's very revered in the city of Florence because of this. Now, I would love to say it's because she loved the common people and that she was an extraordinarily progressive woman of her time. But actually, it was motivated by pettiness. She knew she had no heirs, and the Lorraine family was then the ones who would assume control of the city, and she hated the Lorraine that much. And she spent 3 years documenting every single spoon, and then willed this to everything to the people of Florence. Magnificent. I love it. Yeah. But it was motivated by, she just hated the Lorraine. Okay, so her 200 recipes. Multiple sources. These exotic raw medicinal materials are gathered throughout all of the Portuguese trade routes that were run by Jesuit missionaries. The ducal pharmacy and the fonderia had this stamp you can see right here that lets you know that it came from her. By the way, I'll say AML in all the slides instead of Anna Maria Luisa, because you can only write that out so many times. But this is sort of the part where you realize she's big pharma, okay? She's not, a lot of her recipes, the plants are things that are known throughout the world. Like willow bark is good for headaches. You can see this going back for thousands of years of human history. It's also the main ingredient in aspirin. But Bayer took willow bark, synthesized salicylic acid, and said, here, 200 milligrams for your hangover, right? And then we all do that. That's kind of what she did. She took a lot of common knowledge and things like that and made it into a standardized situation, and then said it was proprietary and no one could know what's in it. But it doesn't come from nowhere in that sense. So if you were wealthy enough and powerful enough, you would get one of these kits from her. Now, the most important recipe that she had, that has the most records of use and request, was one for infant fever water. And that was the biggest project that we did on this. It was the #1 goal in the first of the folios, mostly because it had so much documentation of use. So we wanted to know what was in it. What are the plant species in it? Can we document the ethnobotanical transfer of the knowledge? When was the medicine used in the past and the present? The biochemistry of it, does it work? Okay. And was it used as a political tool? So, like I said, this is her most famous recipe. And it was for infant convulsions or fever, which, it's pretty tough at this time, late 1600s, to keep babies alive. This is a tough time. And so it had a great reputation. So listen to this ringing endorsement. This being a balm and a particular secret, which is made only in the SAS Fonderia and not in any other location, even if others say they have the same recipes. Don't buy generic, right? Yeah. And so, that's just fantastic. So here it is. Because in 2012, we finally got to see what that recipe was. Now, you probably don't read Old Italian. I don't. But what I want you to notice is that there's amounts and how to prepare it, etc. So here's the translation. And let's take a look at the recipe in English. And you could make this if you needed to. Now, some of the ingredients tell us a lot about the types of medicinal forms she was following, what she was studying. Very common. So for Ashley, for Dr. Buchanan, this told her, okay, she's following these medicinal traditions because she's using ground up pearl and ground up coral, and that would be, make it royal. Obviously, right away, I'm keying in on those peony roots and seeds. But I'm sure you're looking at the other part there, which is the human skull, speaking to the alchemy tradition that's in there. But our lab focused on the peony roots and seeds, which was the most likely active ingredient. So this is as it was described in the literature. Precipitation of a pulverized skull of a man who died violently but was never buried. Oriental pearls, red and white coral, yellow amber, and peony roots and seeds. There are 47 species of peony. Which one is she talking about? Because guess what? Plants aren't all the same. This was such a headache. So figuring out which one it was, we finally figured out it was Peonia officinales. Now you're tracking the name of plants. Now I'm in my archives at the Botanical Garden for so long, being very frustrated, mostly by Carl Linnaeus, because originally Peonia officinales had two names, Femina and Mascula, based on feminine and masculine. Linnaeus, in his book Species Platanorum, says, okay, here's the one that grows in the hills, and here's the one that grows all around Florence. We're like, okay, so it's going to be Mascula. That's fine. But thank goodness Anna Maria kept such incredible records. She kept records of where the plant that went into her medicine was collected, and it was in the mountainside. So we know it was actually Peony officinales. And then it wasn't called officinales, it was called Femina, and they changed the name 6 times in the late 1800s, and this was a headache. But we kind of had to figure out which one exactly that it was. And the documentation is a bit difficult. Okay, the other part we need to document was it being used among royal houses. Well, this is where Ashley's work comes in, showing all the letters that show it being used for political power, requests for it, and so forth. Now, you can see this list has a lot of folks that look fairly important, princesses and marquesses and baronesses. What you should notice is they're all women. She mostly worked in a female network, particularly initially. And then she had a bit of a breakthrough. And that was this letter. In July 29, 1727, Anna Maria was asked and it was coming through one of her network, a Marquesa, for the freshest and most perfect powder. Here, I'll give you the English translation, I'll help you out. Freshest and most perfect powder for her friend, the Queen of France at the English court. And it's between her and Maria Savoy, which is up there. They're discussing the infant powder to help for the queen, who she says here, and this, I love this part, she says, I would greatly like that the Queen of France has the right contentment to birth the Dauphin, meaning the new prince. Well, that's pretty cool that she knew she was going to have a boy, right? That's her assumption. Spoiler alert, I looked it up. It was a girl. She had a girl at this point. Yeah. But in this case, for the Queen of France, she is requesting the infant powder. Really takes it up a notch. And from that point on, you start to have more requests like this. It's a letter dated September 21st, 1739. It is a letter from the senator of Bologna to her asking for this miraculous powder he's heard about that has wonderful effects on children. He offers his thanks and devotion. 5 days later, remember we have copies of all the letters going back and forth. 5 days later, she responds, sends him the powder and says, remember me always. She doesn't have a standing army, but he does. And a couple years later, that becomes pretty important for holding her into power. And you can see why. If her powder helped save his son and heir, what does the lady want? Right? That's what everything was about. So we also look, like I said, she's murk, right? She's bare. Peony officinalis is everywhere once you know what to look for in the literature. Going back all the way in time and space, as I would say, all the way back to the 1st century AD, documenting its use for all sorts of things. In Chinese, Indian, Arabic cultures, it's used to treat fevers, epilepsy, witchcraft, demons, all the usual problems. It wasn't just folk medicine, though. It had been used along the trading routes. And there's a weird little note here. Pliny and Descartes say that you have to pull the roots of the peony out at night. And if a woodpecker catches you in the act, they will take out your eyes. So we always sort of want to collect it carefully. Yeah. But it sort of gives you an idea that you know where it was. Now, we get into the biochemistry. Did it work? Sure did, baby. It has in it peoniflorin and galatanin. They work a lot like aspirin. They decreases the extracellular calcium. I could wander into that for a bit, but essentially it works about as well as aspirin, which is really good for bringing down fevers. It's why it shows up so many times in the literature, because it was a non-statistical chance that this would save lives. Why don't we use it today? Because willow bark's easier. And that's what Bear went with. Yeah. And grows further. But that was, very exciting. Now, here's the thing. I know what you really want to know about is the skull. Correct? Am I correct on this? Okay. It does have that intriguing ingredient, right? Which usually, by the way, I always just reference as a fun talking point to students, or to, say, if you're a Medici, you can get that ingredient, And then I had, I guess it was Peyton. How many years ago was it? 5. Oh, you make me feel old. Peyton, would you stand up for a second? I didn't know this former student of mine was going to be here tonight. All right, you can tell, yeah. This is Peyton. He was a young undergrad at Maryville, and he and another student came in, and they said, we've been thinking about that skull, because I'd talked about this, in a seminar, and he said, what do you think it's for? By the way, I didn't know he was going to be here tonight. This is such a treat. Yeah. And he said, what do you think it was for? And I go, it's Ashley said it references like which alchemy school, and they're still using, some of that kind of thing. He goes, right, but that's bone. And I go, that's true, and that's calcium carbonate, so that would stabilize the chemistry. That would stabilize the chemistry. Why haven't I thought about this before? That's why I love working with undergrads. They ask the obvious question that you didn't think of, right? Again, research is humbling. And then I just remember Peyton goes, yeah, but we don't know how long it would stabilize it for, and we don't know how long it would have to stabilize, like the compounds, for transport. And I'm like, but we do. We have all the records of when the request came in and when the thank you note arrived. So we built a map, and we figured out it's about 8 weeks. And then we're like, okay, this is going to be a clean project. we need to get a hold of the roots and seeds, and it was during COVID, so that was an issue. Italy wouldn't ship them, so it went through, this is the power of a botanical network. Are you ready? It went through one of my colleagues at the Stockholm Institute that I worked with, who had a postdoc who had gone home to, I'm gonna blank on where it's not Portugal. Shoot, help me out. Where was it? Poland. Thank you. Said the wrong way. To Poland, yeah. To Poland during the pandemic, and he could get a hold of a postdoc that he went to school with to send him the seeds from Italy, and he sent them to Stockholm, and then they were sent to us, and there they are. And that was not nothing. And that was all done just on botanists emailing each other, like, we can figure this out. And then Peyton and Emma got a hold of a skull. And this is where I am on a list, I'm sure, because my Google history says, what kind of skull is most similar to a human? And it turns out, well, it was mice, but it was too hard to get enough mouse skull. And the other one was cow. And Peyton says, I can get a hold of a cow skull. And they haul this 45-pound thing in. We're a botany lab. So you can imagine my university's like, Kyra, what are you doing now? And I remember the students were like, so what's the protocol? I'm like, I don't know, man. This is we're going to MacGyver thing. We are way outside of my field. So we took it out to the quad, and we hacked into it. And the idea was this. We will make the recipe with and without skull. Okay? And then we will measure the bioactivity over 8 weeks. So you can just sort of picture like what this would look like as a result. You'd have with and without skull, and then you'd track the biochemistry of it. And with skull, we think should stay up here, and without skull, it would drop, right? Elegant, beautiful design. So they did a lot of things. We broke a couple of grinders, and then they got mad, and so we couldn't use them anymore. It's really hard to get skull into powder. Ground up roots and seeds, ground up skull, boiled skull, created what we call doughs, but essentially these recipes. Now, we did this with the purified chemical. There was a larger thing here, but remember, for the purpose of this talk, we're looking at with and without skull, right? And these are the chemicals, albiflorin and pleoneflorin. I remember the day that you came into me, and he was like, the lines track. That's what you're seeing here. What you need to know is what Peyton really wanted to see was the one line to stay up here and the other to drop. And you can see if you squint your eyes, they both drop. Skull did nothing. Now, we ran, one set of experiments, etc. But I was like, no. This is solid, good science. Great science with an answer. It's not what the answer is that's important. It is getting the answer. And I will tell you, you saw at the national conference when you presented, boy, was this a popular study among folks. So, yeah, and it's just very exciting to have the actual student here tonight. I did want to end with a short thing about the original plant I was asked about, because it was a titch shocking. The Ignatius bean, the little one that started off the whole thing. This is the source document. It was a list of what they called stones and roots, medicinal remedies from a cousin, Medici, that were in little wrappings and were actually in Anna Maria's stuff. They were still in a box with this paper. And it was marked 18th of January, 1714. And in this, there were 6 St. Ignatius beans that go in the little mouth. So I go, Ashley, what does that mean? I have to be delicate. Okay, I'm going to be delicate. I wouldn't be delicate in my classroom. I'll be delicate. You don't take the beans in this mouth. Suppositories are very well known in Europe. That's kind of what you get when you go there. So I said, oh, so it's a suppository. And she goes, you would have to have female anatomy to use this bean. I'm like, oh. That is the little mouth. Yeah, it was a vaginal suppository. So I'm like, oh, okay, and we're in, here we go. The names of it. So initially I was like, tracked the name of it St. Ignatius, founder of the Jesuit order, was sort of like what got me started on this. It's a Philippine plant. It's in the Philippines. And I'm like, Ashley, I think I got the wrong plant. She goes, no. That makes perfect sense because of the Jesuit trading routes. I'm like, I don't understand. She goes, because it would be Portuguese. And I'm like, still not to Italy. She goes, okay, the Spanish and the Portuguese divided up the world so they could all explore without killing each other all the time. And so it's a Portuguese. That's the route that Philippines were on. I'm like, still not to Italy. And she goes, the Medici were aligned with the Portuguese. I'm like, oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, History 101, things I didn't know, right? Tracked there, so we have the common names and the indigenous names in the Philippines. Ran into a huge problem where all of the original records were blown up during World War II when the herbariums were destroyed by bombs in the Philippines. Well, that's a headache. Luckily, about 5 herbarium sheets still remain that were traded to the Smithsonian. I knew a botanist there, and they sent us images of them, and we could verify which plant it was. And that let us track who originally named, and I would say discovered it, but say discovered it for Western civilization. And that was a guy by a Jesuit missionary, a pharmacist and a naturalist, known as George Joseph Camel. You actually know who Camel is if you know camellias. Those were named after him by Linnaeus. He's the one who wrote the first comprehensive list, this little document about the Philippine plants. Now, we have to get, because they are using, Anna Maria is using, and her contact is using the name St. Ignatius bean. And we need to get that to the plant that's named today, which he named. And so it became, it was a bit of a journey it took. Camel's major work, which nobody cared about, but he sent it to a friend of his, John Ray, and John Ray's like, I will stick it at the end of my big thing I'm publishing called Historia Platanorum, and it's the first time that it describes this, so it's in a little appendix, this plant called Strychnos ignatii, which is St. Ignatius beans. So you can track this. Now, this looks like a long amount of time, but it's only it's about 8 years, where we have to get it from Camel in 1697, in 1714, into between that time and 1714, it being talked about that way in Italy. And so tracking it through India, which is where John Ray was working and publishing, it gets attached there, which goes to Europe, which means that name is in use by the time it gets to Anna Maria. But I'm talking like by a heartbeat, okay? For this time and place, this is like 5 minutes of communication, right, collectively. So that is really, really tight. Here's some crazy stuff, though, about Ignatius beans. So they were used, you insert the bean to lower the menses and suffering of women. Okay, so it's like a Midol, okay? Someone asked me once, did she use the beans? And I said, well, there's things that are hard about ethnobotany where you can't be secure about, right? You're like, well, here's what we think, here's what we suggest, etc. I know damn Skippy, she never used the beans. And here's why. Because this is one of the most lethal beans on the planet. You have to wear gloves to carry it. And I'm going to show you the poison that's in it. She didn't put beans anywhere. She would have been dead real quick. It would have cured her of her cramps. It would also have cured her of a heartbeat in about 3 minutes. So absolutely not. She never used the beans because she lived and died of old age in her 70s. See? Some things we can be sure about in science. Here's what was in there. You might know this just by thinking of the first name, Strychnos ignatii. The main ingredient is strychnine. And then brucine, which if you know anything about, it's odorless, it's colorless, and it will kill you pretty quickly. You also can build up a tolerance to it. But that sounds like a lot of work and is a little bit terrifying. So yeah, nope, she lived to old age. She never touched it. All right. So you wonder why it was given to the Jesuits and told that it was good for snake bites and for curing women's troubles. So there's a couple of thoughts about this. None of them are what I would call useful records. Huisman in 1857, he lied a lot. He lied a lot about how indigenous people use the plants. But he suggests that maybe it was a Danic gift. A Danic gift, it's based on the myth of King Acrisius, I think is how you say it. His daughter Danae, her son Perseus, where Zeus, as he does, assumes a different form, in this form, golden rain, visits her chamber, she conceives Perseus. Daddy's ticked about that, throws him out. It's a whole thing. But Perseus is the one who had to go get the head of Medusa and gave it as a gift back to the king in order to kill him to rescue his mother. Great. Actually, standing outside the Uffizi is this statue of Perseus holding Medusa's head. So what is a Danic gift? A Danic gift is one intended to bring harm to the recipient, like a bad gift. And Hillsman suggested maybe that's what the native populations were doing. I don't know, man. I think you're just kind of a twit. You weren't the best historian, but who knows? It certainly fits the bill in that. So that's the Ignatius bean, and the one that sort of kicked off everything. Is it medicinal? No. Is it important? No. Is it wildly interesting? I think so, definitely. All right, so I want to show you a little bit of kind of where we wrap up in the archives, what future work looks like. And mostly it's because my girl Maria Luisa, if she'd had Excel, she was like into Excel before Excel existed. Her ledgers, her tax ledgers, so this is like her tax ledger, will then an index that then references where in the archives you go to per recipe to see then each ingredient and where it was collected each time they made the content, which is very cool, which meant we could easily drop that into Excel and keep going. This recipe actually is for getting rid of if a succubus attacks you at night. Useful. No plants in it though, so we're not doing that one. I think you have to like suck on a jade or something like that. But yeah, so she has this very you can follow things all the way through. So always, as we continue this project, unfolding these things, like I said, there's just over 200 recipes. We have done about 36 at this point, pulling out the most interesting, and we continue to build on this work. And every single one of these recipes with the plants has some weird, interesting, unusual thing in it. Because when I talk about this cross-discipline approach of history and salacious stories and human interest and the art and the science that goes into these things, those plant stories, what I've always learned is plants never disappoint you in what hidden stories they have going for them. And that is something that continues to be just a treasure to work with. And I also give my thanks to Maria Luisa for being an unbelievably good archivist at all times that we have until today. So thank you. So yeah, all right. Yeah. All right, are there any questions? I answered the skull. We talked about the little mouth. Any questions? That's very unusual. Yeah. Yes?
You mentioned you tried 36 of the different plants. How many of those did you see were right?
How many were right?
Yeah,
so a lot of them are things that are like known. Like one of them had willow bark in it. Yeah. Well, you don't need to test willow bark. It's salicylic acid. Mostly we're then looking at where else it was used, where it was traveled to. There are some funny ones though. There's one for pleurisy, like for chest infections. And it's like a hot chocolate. Okay, and it has cabbage in it, which sounds gross, and we made it, and it was gross. Yeah, it's not, don't put cabbage in your hot chocolate. But the really fun, interesting thing in there was that then I had to go through the captain's logs looking for where they got the chocolate, because it wasn't Spanish chocolate. Because remember, they're aligned with the Portuguese, and they really get real pissy about the Spanish. So they didn't want to use Spanish chocolate. They wanted their own cacao plants. So they did. But it was Walter Raleigh was the captain. So I'm going through his logs looking for when he landed where in South America and got this plant. And that took a long time. And I didn't do it. I stuck it with an undergrad. And they were flipping through for a good month and a half, his logs. And there it is. He says, we picked up 6 plants of cacao for the Medici, and then it said something unsightly about the Spanish. Yeah. So they could have non-Spanish chocolate. Yeah. So that's what I mean when I say non-disappointing things show up. Like, this is wild. And then we made, like I said, but the cabbages, this one worked because a hot compress on your chest is very helpful when you're coughing. Nothing in the actual recipe was doing anything. But, enjoy the cabbages. I don't know. It was pretty gross, honestly. Yes. I saw a hand back there. Yeah. Oh, all the time. So there is I'm a fellow at Dumbarton Oaks with the Harvard Associate that has something that I think would be interesting to everybody. And you'll find that Anna Maria is on there. And it's creating these visual interactive essays about plants and human stories in a field that really this belongs to, what you call plant humanities. If you look up Plant Humanities Lab, it takes you to these stories. The most recent one was on eggplant throughout all of history and why it was chosen as an emoji for an organ. Yeah, like it makes perfect sense when you see 2,000 years of human history with an eggplant. I don't know what to say. It's not me, it's the plants. So Plant Humanities Lab, it's you sort of scroll through an essay, but then on this side, it's moving through images. There's a great one on ayahuasca where you talk to the healers that are making it. Herbal histories of herbals, they're really interactive. And for students, you hit a button that says Cite, and it pops up in AMA or APA and MLA. You can copy and paste. That was my recommendation. I feel real proud of that. So it gets used all the time, and there's always new ones there. Go and check it out. Even if you're like, I don't know if plants are interesting, these essays are so interactive and visual. Yes?
So the poisonous seeds that you talked about, is there
Ignacious bean.
Yes. Is there record of them being dispersed, and did all of those women die? Or?
Nope. She got that packet, and it never went anywhere. She didn't even put that into her pharmacy. So, yeah. That's why I had to track it all the way back to, the Philippines, right? Yeah. No, as I said, no beans anywhere. Yeah. This was just in her private collection, which is a mercy, right? Think about it. If she'd tried out the beans, we wouldn't have Florence and all the art there today. This is how history works, right? Like someone goes right instead of left and the whole world changes. Yeah. So, yes.
What kind of team is she working with?
So, yeah.
She's
She's the CEO, right? She is running the grand, duchy. But you can see she's a product of her family, right? So she would have had, in those pharmacies, you had teams of like lots and lots of working scientists, but it's actually the Dominican monks that ran her biggest gardens, and they're still the ones running the pharmacia, like where you can get the perfume. Yeah, yeah, so I'll bring it to dinner tomorrow night. You can smell it. Yeah. So that's and the oldest recipe, the oldest thing that the pharmacy sells is the aqua tofana, which is and thieves oil. Do you guys know what thieves oil is? So the idea was you want to rob the dead, okay, because they're buried with a lot of good stuff, and but it's plague times, and that's not bodies you want to touch. So they made an oil that could, you could then touch the dead and you wouldn't get infected. But it's called thieves' oil because no honor among thieves, right? So each of the thieves knew one of the 7 ingredients and they would compile it. This is a legend, right? Well, we got a hold of the thieves' oil that they make that they have always made out of the pharmacy, and we tested it, and that's just pure, the most acidic vinegar that I've ever encountered. So I have no doubt you dip your hands in it and then you could touch the dead. Yeah, nothing's surviving that. And we did antibacterial tests and nothing survived it. Yeah, it was, you opened it was double bagged, double sealed, because if it was just under one seal, you could burn your nose from across the room. Anyway, yeah. I don't know if the thieves had their whole 7 whatever thing, because it was it has oregano and it has rosemary and it has that's not what's killing plague. What's killing plague is this insane vinegar that they had created. Yeah. And it worked. Sterile. Yeah. So it's mostly the Dominican priests that were, growing all these things. Great botanists. Mendel was a, Augustinian monk. Yeah, again, not messing about. Here, he had a giant scientific team. Mendel's peas, yeah. It wasn't a small garden. It was 10,000 plants they were working with. It was a big working team. So the same idea of like working scientists, yeah. And then she just had a lot of, people running the gardens. And there were, I think, 22 pharmacias. Yeah. And now there's the main one. Yeah. Yes?
So she wasn't charging money or anything, she was basically charging favors or hoping for favors in the future? Because you talked about that one deal.
Well, that's interesting, right? So the records that we have that we were going after were ones of people in power. So she wasn't charging the Queen of France, but regular nobles or just wealthy merchants in the area are absolutely paying for it. Yeah, her pharmacies were big business. Big business. But, like I said, those kits, those were diplomatic gifts. Yeah, for power, mostly for troops. She was in a precarious position. She didn't want to, rock the boat. Yeah. Yes?
You said you appreciate organization and planning.
She's my girl. Yeah.
What year are you shooting for to finish the 200 recipes?
So, I have a whole job, yeah, like you, and you saw my other research, and the grant I'm actually wrapping up right now that I'll talk about in your class tomorrow is this big USDA pollination grant we've been doing for 5 years, and that actually pays, and all that kind of thing. But Ashley and I want to take a sabbatical in not this year, but next. And we'll hunker down, we'll go back to Italy, and we'll write. And we will hit, because culling through, we have the recipes that we've done like the scientific work on and things, but for a lot of it, not all 200 have plants in them, like I said. So a lot of them are just like, you just need like the ethnobotanical historical records, or even just, and there's a lot of rocks, where they're like, here's the, quartz was used to get rid of demons, and yeah. Again, think back to Harry Potter, right? They had the stone that would stop the poisons. A lot of that, yeah. So, yeah. So that's what we're aiming for, and then probably a year after that. So yeah, we'll see how well that goes. I have to get it approved, sabbatical year approved. Yeah, I understand the President University's here. Those are hard to let your faculty out of your site to work, right? Yeah, on other things. Yeah. All right, any other questions? Well, thank you so much for spending the evening with me. Those are my babies, by the way, my baby girls. They have traveled always with me. And the first time they were in Florence, they were 2 and 4. So that was daring of us. Yeah. God bless my mother.
Also, please remember we've got to keep the ghost of Mary Elizabeth happy. So please enjoy the food and drink out here. And we'll have plenty of time for more discussion with Dr. Krakos.
Yeah. Thank you.